we all rely on a ton of everyday things, right? And when they're made well, we hardly think about them.
Yeah, totally.
But, when the quality isn't there like a notebook that just falls apart or a calendar where you can't even read the dates,
Oh, yeah,
it can really mess up your whole day.
for sure.
And that actually brings us to today's topic because you reached out wanting to know more about how a company makes sure that its products are always reliable.
Absolutely. You shared some really cool stuff about Lion Paper.
Yeah.
A global company, they make, well, stationery, right? All sorts of stuff.
Yeah, pretty much everything.
Everything, yeah. Notebooks, planners, those calendars, everything we just talked about.
Right.
And they're known for making high-quality products, but it's easy to think that just kind of happens, you know.
It's easy to just assume it.
But there's actually a very deliberate process that goes into it.
There is. And the interesting thing is, Lion Paper actually gave us a detailed breakdown of their entire quality inspection process.
Wow, okay,
So what we're going to do on this deep dive is really get into the specifics of this approach,
okay,
which is very detailed, very transparent, and very systematic.
yeah,
And it's kind of like we're getting a behind-the-scenes look
yeah,
at how a company makes sure that the products they make are excellent every single time,
right,
and how they build that trust with customers,
exactly.
which I think is something that everyone listening can appreciate,
Definitely.
especially if you use these products every day.
Totally, because, I mean, when you grab a notebook, you expect the pages to, well, to stay in.
Right.
You expect the lines to be straight and clear.
Exactly.
And, well, as we'll see, there's a whole system in place that they use to make sure that happens.
There is.
Every single time.
Yeah, and the first thing that really stood out to me is just how many checks and balances they have in place.
Right.
The stuff you sent me outlines a process that's super comprehensive.
Wow.
And it all starts with something that we all notice right away.
Yeah.
How the product looks.
Of course.
Right, the appearance.
The appearance, yeah.
So let's jump right into this appearance inspection.
Okay, yeah.
So the first step is literally just looking at each and every item
Okay.
and really examining it. So
Yeah.
what are they looking for in this step?
Well, basically, they're scanning for any imperfections, anything that's, well, visually off,
Okay.
like stains, scratches, dents, any kind of physical damage, really.
So it's all about that first impression.
It is, but they don't stop there.
Okay.
They also really carefully check the covers, the printed covers, to make sure the colors are the same all over and that the text is sharp and clear.
Right.
They're looking for things like blurring or what they call ghosting. That kind of faint double image.
Oh, yeah.
That can make things look really unprofessional.
Yeah, ghosting. It's so annoying to see.
Totally.
It just instantly cheapens the look of anything.
Yeah, for sure.
So they're paying attention to all these tiny details.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not just a quick look over, right?
Definitely not. They also carefully check all of the inner pages
Okay.
for creases, tears, or even missing printing.
Oh, wow. So like if you opened up a notebook and there was a blank section.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
there should have been lines.
Yeah, imagine that.
Yeah, that would be super frustrating.
Totally.
Totally defeats the purpose of a notebook,
Exactly.
And the interesting thing is they're not just eyeballing it.
Right.
They actually use standardized rulers to measure the products.
Wow.
To make sure they match up with the customer's order specifications, right down to the millimeter.
So from the very first step,
Yes,
they're making sure everything is accurate.
absolutely. Okay, so once they've done this initial appearance check,
Yeah.
they move on to something that's obviously super important
Okay.
for any kind of stationery.
And that is?
The quality of the paper itself.
Of course, yeah.
Right? This is where the actual experience of using the product comes in.
Right. Because in the end, a notebook is meant for writing in.
Exactly. So what are some of the things they focus on when they're inspecting the paper?
Well, they start with a tactile assessment.
Okay, so what does that mean?
So they actually feel the paper
Oh, okay.
to make sure that it has the right level of smoothness and that the thickness is appropriate.
That makes sense.
It's something that, the person using the notebook will notice right away.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, think about the difference between
Yeah,
paper that's smooth and your pen just glides over
right?
versus paper that's rough and it feels kind of scratchy.
Exactly. Huge difference.
It makes a huge difference, yeah.
And then they don't stop at just feeling it. They go on to actually test it.
Oh, how do they do that?
So they use different types of pens, ballpoint pens, gel pens, markers,
Right.
to see how a paper holds up.
Okay.
And what they're looking for is how much the ink bleeds through
Ah, yeah.
and how much it feathers, when the ink kind of spreads out.
Yeah.
And makes the lines fuzzy?
Oh, ink bleeding drives me crazy.
Yeah, me too.
Because if it bleeds through, then you can't use both sides of the paper.
Exactly.
So it's really good that they're testing for that.
Yeah, it's a key part of paper quality.
Makes sense.
And to make sure the whole experience is good,
Yeah.
they do something called a page turning test.
Oh, okay. What's that?
It's basically just checking that the pages turn smoothly
Okay.
and that they don't stick together
Right.
so that when you're using the notebook, it just flows really nicely.
Yeah, that makes sense. All these little details,
Exactly.
that add
Yeah.
up.
It really shows that they're thinking about how people actually use their products.
Absolutely. So, okay, we've talked about how the product looks.
Yeah.
We've talked about the paper.
Right.
Now let's get to how all these pages are actually put together
Right.
to make a functional notebook.
The binding. Yeah.
The binding, exactly.
So this binding quality inspection is tailored
Okay.
to each type of binding they use.
Right.
Because, well, different bindings can have different problems.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's start with spiral-bound notebooks.
Okay.
What are they checking for there?
So with spiral bindings, they're checking that the spirals, whether they're metal or plastic, are completely intact
Okay.
and that they're aligned properly so the pages turn easily,
Right.
and then making sure there are no breaks in the spiral or loose sections,
Yeah.
because that could cause pages to fall out.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if the spiral is messed up, the whole notebook is basically useless.
Exactly.
Okay, so what about glued bindings?
Okay, so with glued bindings, the focus is on how strong the adhesive is
Yeah.
and how well the cover is attached to the pages.
Right.
So they're looking for any signs of peeling
Okay.
or any spots where the glue seems weak,
Right.
because that could cause pages to come loose over time.
Makes sense. And then there are sewn bindings, which always feel really sturdy.
Yeah, they do.
So what do they look for with those?
So with sewn bindings, they look at the stitching really closely.
Okay.
They check that the stitches are evenly spaced and that they're secure, and they make sure there are no loose threads hanging around,
Right.
because those threads could unravel
Yeah.
and make the binding weak.
It sounds like they've got all the bases covered
They really do.
in terms of binding types.
Yeah?
And I noticed they even do what they call a shake test.
Oh yeah, the shake test.
What's that about?
So no matter what type of binding it is,
Okay.
they gently shake the notebook
Okay.
to see if there are any loose parts inside.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, it's a simple way to find problems
Right.
that you might not be able to see just by looking.
So it's like a final check to make sure everything is really solid.
Exactly.
Okay, so they've checked the appearance, they've checked the paper, they've checked the binding. What comes next?
All right, so the next step is what they call the printing color inspection.
Okay.
And this one's really important for a couple of reasons.
Okay.
First, it makes sure that the colors are accurate, especially if there are logos or specific color requirements.
Right, because a company's branding often relies on their colors being just right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's also about making sure the product looks good overall
Yeah.
and that you can actually read the text clearly.
Makes sense.
So to make sure the colors are accurate, they use something called Pantone color guides,
Okay.
which are these industry standard references
Okay.
that show the exact color.
I see.
They also set limits on how much the color can vary,
Right.
because even with really good printing,
Yeah.
there could be slight differences.
Right.
So the goal is to make sure the final color is almost exactly the same
Okay.
as the intended color.
That makes sense.
So that's the color. And then they also look really closely at how the print looks on the page.
Okay, so things like the alignment of the text and how sharp the print is.
Exactly. They make sure that all the text and graphics are lined up perfectly
Right.
without any skewing or misprints.
Okay.
And they pay attention to the edges of graphics to make sure they're crisp and clear.
Yeah.
They also check for any missing text or text that's been printed incorrectly.
Oh, right. Like, imagine if you got a planner and it was missing some of the days of the weeks.
Yeah, exactly.
That would be a big problem.
Huge problem.
And I wouldn't really work as a planner anymore.
Not at all.
So it's not just about the children's being right, but also about them being in the right place.
Absolutely.
And speaking of things being in the right place, let's talk about the page layout and pagination check.
Okay, yeah.
Because if the pages aren't in the right order,
Right?
or if the page numbers are messed up, that can really mess things up for the user.
Totally. It just makes the whole product feel sloppy.
Yeah, and it makes you question the quality overall.
Exactly.
So how do they check for these kinds of errors?
So they'll randomly flip through the notebooks
Okay.
to try to catch any missing pages, duplicated pages, or pages with the wrong numbers.
That's clever, because you can't really check every single page
No.
of every single notebook.
Exactly.
But by checking randomly, they can still catch most of the problems.
Right. And their checks go further than just the page numbers.
Okay.
They also look at the layout of the text on each page
Right.
to make sure the lines are consistent
Yeah.
and that there's no double printing or text that's just in the wrong spot.
So it's all about making sure the product not only looks good, but is also easy to use.
Absolutely.
Okay, so now the product has passed all these visual and functional checks.
Yeah.
What happens next?
All right. So next, they test how well the product holds up under real-world conditions.
Okay.
And the first test is what they call the weight-bearing test.
Okay, what is that?
So basically, they're trying to simulate the kind of pressure the product might go through
Okay.
during shipping or storage.
Right.
So they stack a bunch of product on top of each other,
Okay.
and then they apply a measured amount of pressure,
Okay.
either using special equipment
Right.
or just by carefully pressing down on it.
So what are they looking for in this test?
They want to see if the product can handle that pressure without being damaged.
Okay.
So they're checking for creases, warping, any cracking in the binding.
Right, because a product could be perfect when it leaves the factory,
Exactly.
but if it gets damaged on the way to the customer,
Right.
that's still a bad experience.
Totally. And this test is all about making sure that doesn't happen.
It makes a lot of sense. And then, of course, there's the packaging,
Yeah, the packaging inspection.
which is kind of like the final layer of protection
It is, yeah.
before the product gets to the customer.
Exactly.
So what do they look at when they're inspecting the packaging?
Well, first they check the outer boxes
Okay.
to make sure there's no damage or dents or anything like that.
And I assume they're also looking at what's inside the box.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
They check all the protective materials,
Okay.
like cardboard inserts and cushioning, to
Right.
make sure everything is securely in place
Yeah.
so it doesn't get jostled around and damaged during shipping.
That's important.
It is, yeah,
And I also check all the labels and barcodes, right?
absolutely.
To make sure the right product is going to the right place.
Exactly. Got to make sure all that information is accurate.
For sure. And I saw that they even do compression tests on the packaging itself.
They do, yeah.
What are those for?
So those tests are to make sure the boxes are strong enough
Okay.
to handle all the bumps and drops that can happen during shipping.
So they're really making sure that the packaging can protect the product inside.
Absolutely. It's all about making sure the product gets to the customer
Right.
in perfect condition.
Wow. It's amazing how much thought and effort goes into even the packaging.
It is, yeah.
Okay, so this next step is really interesting to me, and it
Yeah.
kind of shows how quality control is evolving.
Okay.
It's called Inspection Body Camera for Transparency.
Oh, yeah. That's a really cool one.
So Lion Paper is actually giving their inspectors body cameras
Wow.
to record parts of the inspection process.
That's really innovative.
It is.
So what are they recording?
So they're recording things like when they're checking the pages for defects, when they're verifying the binding,
Right.
and when they're checking the packaging, and then all those videos are uploaded to the cloud.
And the idea is that customers might be able to see these videos.
Yeah, that's where they're heading. By
Wow.
letting customers see how the products are being inspected,
Right?
they're really taking transparency to a whole new level.
They really are.
It's a way of saying, hey, we're confident in our process.
Yeah.
And we want you to see exactly what we do to ensure quality.
It's a big trust builder.
It is, yeah.
It's like almost an invitation
Yeah,
for the customer to see firsthand how much they care.
absolutely. Okay, so after all these inspections and recordings,
Yeah.
what's the last step before the product is actually shipped out?
All right, so the final stage is final approval and shipment.
Okay,
So once all the inspections are done,
yeah,
the inspectors write up detailed reports
okay.
of everything they found,
Makes sense.
and then a supervisor reviews those reports.
But then there's a final check to make sure everything is in order.
Exactly. And only when everything is approved, the product can be shipped out.
So it's a very thorough process from start to finish.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so then what happens?
So once the product is approved,
Yeah,
it gets carefully sealed in its packaging,
right.
and they put on a QC passed sticker.
So that's how you know it's gone through the whole quality control process.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And then finally, the package is handed off to the logistics team,
Okay,
who take care of getting it delivered
right.
safely and on time.
So it's like they're really taking care of the product every step of the way.
Absolutely.
From the moment it's made to the moment it gets to the customer.
Exactly. It's a real commitment to quality.
Yeah, it is. And the information you sent me sums it up really well.
Yeah.
They say that Lion Paper's quality inspection process is rigorous and methodical.
It definitely sounds like it.
And they highlight that this is how they keep returns low
Right.
and build that trust with their customers.
Yeah. Which is so important for any company.
It is, yeah.
Especially one that makes products people use every day.
Absolutely. And I love this quote from Leo Shaya, the CEO of Lion Paper. You design, we deliver.
Yeah, that's a good one.
It really sums up their philosophy, you know?
It does, yeah.
They're saying, we'll take your vision
Right.
and we'll make sure it's executed perfectly.
And this whole quality control process
Yeah.
is how they actually make that happen. app. It's not
Exactly.
just words.
It's not. It's action.
Yeah.
It's really eye-opening to see how much detail and care
Yeah,
goes into making something that we often take for granted, like a
totally.
simple notebook.
You really start to appreciate it
Yeah,
when you see all the work that goes into it.
you do. And I think what we've learned about line paper's process
Yeah,
is a great example of how companies can build that trust
yeah,
with their customers.
definitely.
It's a reminder that quality isn't just some marketing term.
Right.
It's the result of hard work and attention to detail.
Absolutely.
So here's something for you to think about. Now that you've seen all the steps
Yeah,
that go into making a high-quality product,
yeah.
how does that change the way you think about the things you buy?
Hmm.
Even everyday things like, well, stationery.
Yeah,
Do you look at them differently,
yeah.
knowing all the effort that goes into making them?
That's a really good question.
It's something to think about, right?
Definitely.
Because there's a whole world of quality control that's happening behind the scenes
Right.
to make sure the products we use
Yeah,
are reliable.
it is.
And it's easy to forget about that,
Totally.
but it's really important.
It is.
And it's something we should all appreciate.
I agree.